Remember the magic you forgot was you. Wake up inside the dream. Wake up inside the dream.
Hi, welcome back to the Video Shaman channel. I'm your host, Alex Lipton, and I'm just so grateful that you're here and we're all participating in this wonderful thing we call life. I say that half facetiously because sometimes it's not so wonderful. In most cases, for a lot of people, it's not wonderful at all. It's the complete opposite. It's dreadful. And I find this to be a challenge in my life sometimes, a lot of the times actually, because the thing is, no matter how spiritually centered you might find yourself to be, the world around us is very chaotic. And we'll get into that concept of chaos in a second. But sometimes there's nothing we can do but react. They always say, like, you can't control the world outside of you. You can only control how you react to the world. And the thing is, that might be easier said than done. And it's, in a lot of cases, that's true. But I think this is one of the best platforms in terms of timing for people to share their ideas and share their experiences, because when we come together and when we start listening and resonating with people, we start to find that we're not alone. When we're not alone, I find it to be better. I find it that we're more better equipped to be able to manage our reactions, and to use a metaphor of releasing the steam from a valve. Everybody's filling up with a lot of emotion and reactions. And if we don't have a proper place to vent these things in a healthy way, people can explode or implode. And there seems to be a lot of that going on in the world. There's a lot of crazy reactions going on right now. And I mean, it seems perfectly natural with all the crazy things going on in our environment. But like I brought up before, this idea of chaos, thing about chaos around us, it seems like unpredictable. There's no pattern to it whatsoever. Look at the world. There's a lot of just unpredictable things happening. Things are falling apart. All of the institutions, all of our belief systems and our sense of community and identity, they're all starting to fall apart. If not deep in the end state, it feels like we're falling apart. But the funny thing about chaos is that it looks random when you're staring at it in the face, when you're in it. But if you proverbially take a step back and take further and further step back, you'll start to realize that the chaos is actually not so unpredictable. It's not so random. There actually is a pattern to the chaos. There's really design to the influenceable reality right now. It's very much a natural state that what's going on right now. There's a deconstruction of our world as we've known it, and a new world being brought up around us. And the question is, are we going to have an influence on this world, or are we going to let this world be built around us like a cage? You know, the thing is make sure that you have the key before you get locked into the cage. And it's very subtle. It happens very subtly. But when we start to engage with it in a more healthy, profound way, we can start to liberate ourselves from the cage around us. And this is not something new. This is definitely something that's been going on for many thousands of years. This whole idea of our perceptions and our beliefs actually being programmed by other people, and that our lives end up being a printout of other people or society's programming. And we have the ability to break free of this program, to see through reality. This world is not an accident, and it's not a prison per se, but our perception of it is a sort of cage. And the thing is, when we understand how to change our perceptions, how to interact in community in profound and healthy ways, then we actually start to liberate ourselves from that cage and start to see how beautiful this place actually is. Even the darkest, most challenging times, if we have a different shifting idea of what that means, they could be this could be the most opportunistic time to make really big changes in your life. And I know we're all struggling with that in one way or another. And again, we need to come into community for that. So I wanted to make this video about a little subject, just a little subject. It's a subject called God. It's obviously not a little subject. It's a big subject, a lot of very divisive idea, and also a very humbling idea, depending on how you look at it, right? Some people see God as everything, and God is ruling over us, and God is just this infinite light, or however you describe God. And other people may say that God doesn't exist. God is a figment of our imagination. It's something we created to feel more comfortable about this world, this chaotic world. We're trying to find a way to have a homeostasis or a balance. So God is often a way to fix that, or it's something that we need to get away from. And I think we're going to talk about this in some interesting ways here, and we're going to go into down the rabbit hole, as it were. I want to try to come up with some new phrases to describe this experience, because on a side note, I think the Matrix terminology and lingo is stale at this point. It's a program that has all these associations and linkages to things that I'm personally not interested in associating with, whether it's socio-political or just like pseudo spiritual isms. Go down the rabbit hole, quantum consciousness. Like, what do these even mean anymore? I don't even know. So we're going to find something new, a new way to describe these things. But for lack of a better term right now, we're going to go down the rabbit hole and talk about this thing called God and religion. So I just want to say up front that this is not an attack on religion whatsoever. I'm not discrediting the people who are religious at this point. People who are religious are oftentimes very spiritual. They're very community based. They have a lot of love in their heart. And but then also we're going to go on the other side of things and see how perhaps religion is one of the biggest problems on this planet. But it's not as much about the people who are religious. It's about the institutions themselves. So I'm not attacking faith here. We're going to be talking about the symbols, and we're going to talk about the history of some of these subjects and things associated with religion. And we're going to talk about psychology and how a lot of these symbols and meanings drift and change over time. 1,000 years ago, a word like heretic, or 2,000 years ago, let's say 4,000 years ago, back during the time of the ancient Greeks, for example, just a word as a simple heretic. It really means choice, having a choice, someone who chooses. Whereas a couple thousand years later, in the wake of the Roman Catholic Church, the word heretic became something completely different. It meant choice originally, but then it just went to like evil, bad, choosing the wrong thing. So it went from a much more ubiquitous term of just like the ability to choose to you made the wrong choice, people who made the wrong choice. So just even one word can change meaning in a relatively short period of time. The most dangerous lie isn't that God doesn't exist. It's that someone else is speaking for God. Okay, this should really be clear and really resonate with you in a very visceral way. This concept that whatever you think of as God is one thing, but then someone who gets in the way and actually interprets it, the interpreter of this thing, actually can change and distort the meaning. That shows you how much influence a human being can have over just an idea, which is God. So let's talk about God a little bit. Okay, so today, when we hear the word God, or if you're a believer in God, if you go to church or temple or a mosque or anything like that, even if you're into New Age spirituality and you think of like spirit, most people today, when they think of God in a very etheric, spiritual sense, one way or another, whether it's wearing this mask or that mask, it has this characterization or that characterization. It's more or less a spirit. It's something beyond our world. It's outside of the realm of human beings. I like to joke a little bit. It's kind of like the spirit of Santa Claus, the spirit of Saint Nick. He's always watching. He's always listening. He can see everyone and be everywhere at all times. So you better be nice. So this like omniscient presence is what a lot of people think of as God. However, if you look at God from a historical academic point of view, I'm going to put some links in the description to some really cool YouTube channels and some books that I think are, way more advanced experts into the history of religion and act from an academic point of view. But when you look at religion and God from a more academic point of view, as opposed to from a believer's point of view, you start to see that there's actually an origin story to this deity that we call God today. When people believe and worship God, they feel one thing and they think one thing, but linguistically and historically, there's an origin to that. And it's not, and like I said before, just how things change. The origin story to this God we have in religion is not what it is today. Back a couple 10,000, not 10,000, but many thousands of years ago, This is not the same idea of God that we have today. So we're going to talk about this God. And let's say God with a lowercase g for now, okay? Because we're going to diverge from this idea of God that we have in the modern world today. We're going to talk about God as a deity in the world of polytheism, okay? Polytheism, different than monotheism, right? Monotheism, the belief in one God. Polytheism, the belief in many gods. And that's like a distant world that a lot of people today, and, you know, for good reason, because of the school and the upbringing and everything, it's so different from what we have now, believing in many gods. There's Poseidon, there's Zeus, there's Baal, there's Enki, there's Enlil. Like, there's all these different cultures around the world that had various pantheons of gods. And the thing is that when we have this idea of the monotheistic deity today, the God is actually kind of an amalgamation of all these polytheistic gods. So who is this God and what is his name? Well, we're going to go into this a little bit, but the one I want to start with is the name Yahweh. Yahweh, or Jehovah, according to the Christians, or even Allah compared to the Muslims. They're all slightly different, and a lot of people don't know this. I'm sure you do, and if you've made it this far into the video, I'm hoping this could be some information that you could digest and learn from, or just be entertained by. This idea that all three of these deities, these gods, Yahweh, Jehovah, and Allah, are all the same being, just reinterpreted over the course of many centuries. They're just kind of like reboots of the same old story, but brought into a modern audience, a modern context as culture and things change. The thing about Yahweh that's important to recognize is that Yahweh, according to the Bible, when scholars and religious theologians, and they read this stuff, they see that the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, is the same God that Jesus was talking about in the New Testament. But in reality, if you go back into the historical records, you see that Yahweh was not actually the solo deity that was different than all the rest. Yahweh was also part of a pantheon of the polytheists. Yahweh was just one of these beings. In fact, Yahweh originated, some of the earliest records show that Yahweh originated in the South Levant region in the Middle East, and was a patron deity of a certain group of people down there. He was a war god. He was actually a storm god, and a different kind of storm god. There were many different storm gods. There were some storm gods that were honoring and venerating storms and rain that would come in and create healthy, fertile ground for crops to grow. But then there's also the storms that are devastating, with massive lightning and thunderstorms that would cause havoc and floods and things like that. Yahweh is associated with these particular types of storms. He's a god to be feared, and he was a tribal war god, like I said. So it's interesting that when you go into the world of polytheism, you start to see that there's a hierarchy of these beings. I like to think of the polytheistic world as like a corporation or an administration where you have different levels of control and structure, and at the very top you have a CEO. Well, without having to go too deep into this, for the layperson like me, I like to try to keep things simple. Yahweh was one of the lesser gods. He was not the CEO. There's this really interesting story that you can go find out from better experts about how Yahweh, a lesser god, ended up taking over the position of many of these other gods, assuming their roles, having corporate mergers, if you will, and then eventually becoming the one god you should worship out of the other ones. Most people don't recognize that. People think Yahweh was somehow unique and different from all these other ones. But no, like realistically, this God had very same characteristics as all these other gods from the ancient times. But there was like a corporate merger that he eventually became like the one God, and don't worship any gods before me. That's really one of the most important attributes to Yahweh. There is no God before me. And I'm a very jealous God, you know. Yahweh even absorbed a lot of these traits of other gods, like I mentioned, including Baal and including El the Most High. El was a patron deity who was a wise, loving, benevolent father figure, whereas Yahweh was more like the storm god's son of El. And this is all stuff you can look up. It's all very true. But the point of the thing I want to emphasize here is that Yahweh is not really the God that we have today, even though it's written about and people, the interpreters, say that Yahweh is the one, the only, the God that people resonate with. It's not. Yahweh was just one of many who eventually took over in the epic Game of Thrones scenario from ancient times, because that's really what's going on. Monotheism didn't erase the other gods, it just merged them into one. It wasn't a paradigm shift at the time when these things were going on. Later that came. Today we think of it differently. I've made some videos before about Gnosticism, and the thing is about Gnosticism is that that's not a real group of people or a religion or anything like that. Even the people that we call Gnostics today, they would not call themselves Gnostics. The Gnostics basically had different belief systems than the organized church of today has. The thing about the Gnostics that we just need to understand here is that eventually they became known as heretics. Remember how I mentioned heretics, that word changed over time. They were people that had a different choice of the way things were going, but then eventually they became known as the bad guys in the story. They made the wrong choice. They were looking at things incorrectly according to the early church. And the thing about the Gnostics is that one of the huge differences or schisms that they have compared to other early Christians was that the Gnostics more or less believed that the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh specifically, was not the real God. Now, I think this is interesting because it really leads into the story we're starting to unfold here, that the world of God that we have today is not the God that was existent back then. The Gnostics were the ones that were really making this a known reality for people. People were gathering and believing in this, and it wasn't an offshoot. There were a lot of Gnostics back then. There was even a guy named Valentinus who almost became the Pope, and he was a Gnostic. Valentinus eventually became known as the arch heretic. So this was not just some offshoot group. So one of the key things about this, I was going to say creature, but it's not really a creature. It's a deity, a being. This Yahweh figure is not the real God, according to the Gnostics. It was known as the demiurge. Demiurge is a Greek word, comes from a Greek word, means craftsman. It's a creator God, but it's not the source of everything. See, that's the thing that most people today think about with God. They think God is the source of everything. And I would agree with that. That's the way I think of God. God is like the Force from Star Wars. It surrounds us. It penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. But the demiurge, according to the Gnostics and according to a lot of these groups back in those days, in the early centuries, they saw that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, was actually a creator craftsman God that was creating from the source. And there's a very interesting cosmology and story about how the world began. It's different than the one that we have today. Like in the beginning, there was nothing, and then there was the light and the logos and created the animals. And like, it's very different. It's a lot more complex, actually. Debatable, and maybe debatably too complex at times, but I find it very interesting. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can learn about this. One of the key characteristics of Yahweh is that Yahweh demands worship and obedience to. He's a God to be feared, because if you don't do what Yahweh says, you will be punished. That has been seen time and time again in the Old Testament. And it's very indicative of this statement or phrase that we have, this belief, this meme in our minds, like, I'm a God-fearing man. It's like, I'm a God-fearing man. Why do we fear God? If God's all unconditional love and source and everything like that, then what is to fear? Well, it comes from this memory from a long time ago where God was something to fear. It was this figure that was, in my opinion, masquerading as God, or was being worshipped as God. Like I said before, the thing is, it's not about God. The issue isn't God, it's who interprets the God. So if you trace the interpretations all the way back, who was the first interpreter? These are the people that I'm trying to point fingers at right now and say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe this is something we need to address here. If we're going to come together in unity, let's try to ask, is there anyone that stands to benefit from us being divided? I think there is. I think it comes down to this idea of God and how we have a complete misinterpretation of what's going on. Well, let me correct that. I think we have generally, broadly, a good interpretation of God today. But the problem, to use a metaphor, is a computer virus that comes in and hacks into your computer. You're connecting to the internet. You're connecting to the source. You're connecting to God. But then something comes in, gets in the way between you and God, masking itself. You don't even see it's there. And as you're conducting yourself on the internet, as you're just using your computer even, suddenly there's things getting siphoned off and redirected. Just think of the data collection services that are going on right now. How much data is being collected under the guise of, oh, well, we're just trying to help the algorithm. Like, what are they actually doing with the data? That's a really good question that applies fractally to this idea of God. we're all connecting to God. We all have a sense of morality or ethics or ecology. And we'll talk more about that stuff later. But is there something in between that's filtering and siphoning out our energy and feeding something that we're actually participating in that is unbeknownst to us? These are good questions to ask. So the thing about the demiurge, this creator or craftsman god, is that some people would say that this is an evil force. It's like the devil is disguising himself as God, to use a religious framing of that. But there's other people, including myself, that look at it in another way as well. Both of them, I think, are relevant. The other one is that this God or this craftsman, this demiurge, Yahweh, this being that is, for all intents and purposes, the God of the religions, is an ignorant God. It's just ignorant and has no idea about the real connection to the universe and seeks it. It desires it. We as human beings have the direct connection. We have a relationship with nature in a way that this craftsman doesn't. So is using us, is siphoning off our energy. So the thing is, we have to recognize and apply this today, I think, that sometimes just because somebody's doing something you don't like doesn't mean they're evil. It could just mean that they're ignorant. They're only doing what they believe is right. The question comes down to belief. When God starts sounding exactly like the government, we have to address this issue. That's the thing I brought up before about how Yahweh, Jehovah, and Allah are all the same being, just different versions of the same story. There's a movie that came out. I thought it was really entertaining. It's a scary movie, actually, at the same time, but also very insightful. It's called The Heretic. There's that word again, with Hugh Grant. And there's these, getting too much into spoilers, these Mormon missionaries come in to, spread the good word of Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon and stuff. And this guy is like really well versed in all religions. And he actually explains this whole concept that the religions are basically the same thing, just reforming themselves to fit a modern audience. And how these different stories all come together in different ways. You've got Islam, you've got Christianity, and you've got Judaism. Well, it doesn't just limit itself to religion. This actually applies to literature. Of course, there is a lot of overlap here, but the best literature that describes the situation of how this one God, this one being became known as the all-powerful God of today is best described in the Dune series. In Dune, we have a guy named Paul Atreides who ends up coming to this planet Arrakis in this crazy planetary conflict of feuding space lords of who's going to control the resources of this planet. And you have the indigenous people on the planet who are suffering under the oppression and tyranny of this interstellar conflict. Paul Atreides ends up rising to the position of a divine messiah character who ends up waging a war to become the emperor of the universe. And the thing is, we can resonate and relate to Paul Atreides in the beginning, but he becomes a different character eventually. He becomes known as Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib is this messiah figure. He's a religious tyrant. And it's really interesting because it ties directly to an ancient Babylonian story of one of these deities, these polytheistic gods, if you will. It's known as Marduk. Marduk is the son of Enki, and Enki is at war with his brother Enlil. There's a tie over here in Dune as well. Paul Atreides is the son of Leto Atreides. House Atreides is at war with House Harkonnen, and when Paul Atreides ends up rising to the position of authority, he becomes the very thing that he was fighting in the end. This is exactly what's going on with Marduk. Marduk was humanity's champion, fighting back against the oppression of the gods, but then ended up becoming the very tyranny he was fighting. So it's this great saying, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. We need to recognize that this thing is constantly shifting and moving around, but it's the same thing. There's a statement too that floats around now all the time. It's, one side or the other side. Which side are you on? Well, both wings are necessary for the bird to fly. It's a little cliche at this point, but it's true. Whether you take this pill or you take that pill, you're still taking a pill from me. This is the single truth that's coming into the story right now that we need to recognize. Paul Atreides was not a hero. He was a warning. He was a warning that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And more importantly, you are not necessarily the victim of your own will. Like Darth Vader. He turned to the dark side because of his will and he made the wrong choices and he was led by his emotions. If he just had better willpower, he would have done it, which which means that evil is inherent within you and it's your choice between evil or good. Whereas in Dune, it's a little bit different. Paul Atreides doesn't become Muad'Dib as this religious tyrant later on because of his lack of willpower or his imbalance to make the wrong choice. It was because the world around him was such that he was put with horrible options of what is to be the fate of the world. He only became that way because the world around him influenced him to be that way. He kind of didn't have a choice in that matter. So that's an important thing to recognize, and is that we are actually a product of our environment. We're not necessarily creating the environment. We have an influence over the environment, but it's not inherently us that's creating the environment. We are much more influenced by the things around us, just like Paul Atreides. So to wrap all this up here into a important message in the wake of division, chaos, and trying to find some sort of peace and balance and ground that we can stand on in this situation, because the ground is constantly shifting beneath our feet in this world. So how the hell are we going to get back up? Like Bruce Wayne's father tells him, what happens when we fall, Bruce? Well, we learn to pick ourselves back up. But what happens if the ground is a constant perpetual earthquake? Every single time we fall, we get back down, we fall, we get back down. How do we bring balance back to the force and actually start to realize that the earth, we can dance with it and we don't actually have to fall or get back down. We can dance with it. How do we learn how to dance with it? Well, let's recognize the real enemy here. And it's not God. I just want to emphasize that. It's not God, even though I'm explaining all these things about God. It's more about the concept of authority. Authority is the real question here. This concept of authority is important to reframe because some might say that you have to make a choice. You have to recognize that you don't have authority. God has authority. And that you need to submit, repent, and worship God in order to have a sustainable, healthy life. And more importantly, get to heaven, which is not here, according to most religious people. But then you have the other side of it, which is the so-called left-handed path, which is that there is no God, there is no authority, and the only authority is you. You are the only authority, and that you get to decide what's right and wrong, and that you can basically just do whatever you want because there is no law in the world. It's that you have the authority within yourself. And what I'm going to suggest here is that they're both wrong. They're both right in their own way because, you know, like it's all part of the learning experience and we need these polarities to actually understand like a contrast. If we don't have sour, then we won't appreciate the sweet. So these are good things in their own way, in their own perspective. But I also will say that I think the better choice is to recognize that authority is transcendent of something that's out there or just in here. Authority brings in another question. It's called responsibility. Who has responsibility here? According to a lot of religious people, it's like, well, God is the ultimate, you know, you got to submit to God's responsible for all this stuff. But the thing is, if you start to take responsibility for your actions, then you start to actually realize that you have a conscience. You actually have an internal mechanism that will allow you to make true ecological decisions. Okay? The thing is, in terms of, I like to use ecology as a word to describe what I'm going into here, as opposed to morality or ethics, because ecology is a scientific term that describes the relationship of an organism to its environment. The real question about whether you're going to have a healthy or unhealthy ecology comes down to the fact that you have to assess, is that relationship causing degradation to the system, or is that relationship encouraging the system to grow and thrive? This is the real ultimate sin. If you want to say in terms of religion, what's the real sin here? The sin is causing harm for malintent purposes. Whether you're hurting yourself or you're hurting other people. They're all expressions. It's not about what's right or what's wrong. But if you have two people in this example that are so opposite in beliefs, yet when they come together, they start fighting each other and throwing rocks at each other, and then they literally kill each other. It's like a game of tic-tac-toe. The truth about tic-tac-toe is that nobody can win that game. So if you keep playing that game, it's going to just waste your time and just drain your energy. It's going to drain the energy of the system. So that's the real question, because when you start to recognize responsibility, you start taking responsibility and treating others as you wish to be treated, which is one of these things called the golden rule. And and this golden rule actually dates way back further in time than religion itself. Some people say, oh, well, this is one of the religious ideas. If we didn't have religion, then we would be all animals killing each other. I beg to differ. We'll go deeper into this subject way more in coming videos, but I just wanted to make a note here in a little historical context that God is something to us now, but it is not the same as what it was to people many thousands of years ago. In fact, there is a whole historical element to the Bible and to the Torah and to the Quran. It's not just the spirituality that people mostly talk about and feel and believe today. There's actually a socio-political element to it. It's a conflict of battle between feuding houses of kings long ago that were worshipped as gods. Just think about how people worship the king in ancient times, even today, with people who want to be the monarch. They worship them as if they were like a god or a prophet. But imagine that prophet that took on god-level status. That's the story of Dune. So go watch Dune. Go read the book, more importantly. Go read the first 3 books. You get a really good sense of what the hell's going on in terms of religion in a science fiction kind of way, in a humanist way. So my final message is this, is that when we recognize God for what it truly is, which is a state of coherence, it's an awareness of something divine or something beyond our level of reality. It's a source. God is a source beyond the narrative, whether you look at it one way or the other. The bottom line is that God is something that it's like an ideal. God is like an ideal. Whereas a lot of people in the world and countries and politics today look at God as more of like a weapon of mass destruction. And you can say that the Bible has saved so many people, or the religion has saved so many people. And it has in a lot of ways. But also this Bible has been used as an ultimate weapon to destroy people's lives and destroy cultures and destroy the history of where we came from and where we're going. So if you want to win this war on consciousness, you have to recognize the purpose of this war, which is to divide us. And it's inherent within the original question. You don't win the war on consciousness. You recognize what the enemy is, and then you back away from it. You stop playing the game. The real enemy here is worshiping authority. Authority is a real thing. God is a real thing. Whether it's an idea or a figment in one person's mind or a very strong real reality in the other person's mind. Point is, it's an idea. It's good to have ideas and it's good to strive for higher ideals. But the moment we start worshiping the interpretations of these ideals, we start to have war. We start to have conflict. So thank you so much for watching this. I hope it was interesting, and we're going to get into a better groove hopefully this year. So thank you very much. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for coming to Video Shaman.